we care too much about stats in Halo Esports? I made a tweet recently talking about stats in Halo and their importance. My motivation for this came from some discussions with friends about stats in Halo Esports and to what degree we use them to form opinions on players and teams. I wanted to reply to everyone, but I feel like the character limit on Twitter didn't really allow me to do so how I wanted, so here I am making this video. So first of all, let me just say, I don't think this is just a Halo Esports thing. I'm sure anyone that watches traditional sports such as football has seen an increasing number of stats be introduced over the years. In Halo, I remember barely over 10 years ago looking at the end of a game and only having access to kills, deaths, assists. Now with updated stats in the game, we have access to a variety of new stats such as damage dealt, damage taken, accuracy, shots fired. And with the help of the community, we have access to even more detailed stats through the services of people like Buff Stats, Halo Data Hive. So this is all good, right? The more stats, the better. And from a casual player point of view in Halo, I don't think there's too much harm done, but my focus in this discussion is on Halo Esports. I have been competing in Halo tournaments and watching Halo tournaments for well over a decade, dating back to I think Halo 3 MLG being when I first started, and I've seen the discussion around stats change and evolve in that time more and more. I have seen it affect people's decisions when it comes to making team changes themselves, and also be involved in the discussion amongst fans of top Halo teams, as reasoning for which player they believe should be dropped. Whenever these discussions in forums come up about which players should be dropped from said pro team, the reasoning will usually follow as something like, this player has consistently the lowest KD and lowest damage, therefore if this team replaced this player with a better player, this team would improve. So is this wrong? I'm sure we have all heard pros talk about how fans look at stats too much and put too much value in stats. Firstly, I think it's important to recognise the line has to be drawn somewhere. I think some people tend to be on too much of an extreme when it comes to their dismissal of stats. I think we can all agree that there is a lot that happens in the game of Halo that is of value and importance that is not displayed in stats. But with that, if a player is constantly, say, dropping a 0.1 KD each game, we can all recognise that it's probably an indication of underperformance. But on the flip side of that, we can all recognise that stats are not the ultimate judge of who performed better or worse. For example, if a player has, say, a 1.4 KD and another player has a 1.2 KD, we cannot say that means the player with the higher KD provided more value that match. That does not account for how much a player may have baited their team or played bait, blocked key spawns, messed up spawns, ignored objective, etc, etc. The list goes on. My point is that I think most people in this discussion recognise it's not binary. Stats are not everything, and stats are not nothing. So from there, I think the question is, how do we view stats? How much can we derive from stats when talking about Halo Esports? My personal view is that stats can indicate things, but we will never know for sure without looking at the actual gameplay with our own eyes if those things are certain. One thing I mentioned in my tweet is that I had noticed that in a few recent high profile team changes, when looking at stats, the player who happened to be dropped was the player who had the consistently lowest KD and damage dealt. Two stats that I think are looked at often in the modern era of Halo Esports, but of course this could be coincidence. Now if you look at any given best of 5 series for example, I believe this is too small a sample size to make sweeping assertions about a player's problem/value based on stats. A series with zero oddball time could indicate a player who needs to be more objective minded, or it could just be that in that one game they were never in a position to grab the ball. Ultimately, I think it's impossible to make strong statements about the value of stats in a one-off series. But when looking at a large data set of say hundreds of scrim/tournament games, I think a player who is say consistently below their teammates on both damage/KD at a significant enough margin could indicate to that team that this player is underperforming and replacing them could be an area for improvement. But following on from that, I think ultimately they/we won't know for sure if those stats are pointing to a low quality of gameplay or not unless their actual gameplay is reviewed. So ultimately, what is my point? Maybe these pro teams that dropped their player with the lowest KD/damage consistently did so for totally different reasons and they had no knowledge of these stats. Or it could be that through other means they determined this player was performing poorly and this just happened to be reflected in these stats. I don't think there's ever going to be a clear answer, and in a way that's a good thing. There's so much nuance to Halo Esports in my opinion. There are so many factors that go into what makes a good or bad player that can't just be boiled down to stats. But from a fan and broadcast perspective, having access to these stats helps enhance our experience as a Halo Esports fan. I think there are valid concerns from pro players that stats are held against them by fans to pressure teams to make changes, but ultimately, I don't think the answer is to dismiss stats entirely. In my view, it's all a matter of exactly how much value you put in the stats, and as I have learned from many discussions on this topic recently, the answer seems to be different for everyone. I hope you enjoyed this video and the discussion around stats in Halo Esports, and I hope this conversation can continue in the comments and beyond. I'm a Halo Esports nerd, so for me, the more conversation about anything relating to Halo Esports, the better. Thank you for watching and have a great rest of your day.